My name is Alyssa Morris, and I am a senior at Utah State University. And the purpose behind my final leadership project is to amplify strong, diverse women's voices in our community. I had the opportunity to sit down and have conversations with two very strong women, one being Senator Iwamoto, the second one being Representative Kwan. They both serve in the Salt Lake area, and they have done so much good, and they had so much advice to share. I think it goes without saying that these past couple years, months, weeks, days even, there's been so much hurt, so much injustice, and so much hate that has been amplified, and there's so much change that needs to happen. That's what drove me to have these conversations. I wanted advice on how to be a part of that change and to bring action and just to listen and learn from them. They're very amazing and they had so much to share, and I can't wait for you guys to hear that as well. I just encourage you as you watch this that you can find that drive in yourself to be a part of bringing about change and to be involved in your own community.
My name's Jamie Iwamoto, and I'm in the Utah State Senate, District 4, which is Salt Lake City, Holiday, Mill Creek, and Murray. And prior to that time, when I first got into politics, really kind of the same as you in a way. You know, I was recruited, but I had always kind of been involved in my community.
Thanks for asking me. Well, I'm Karen Kwan. I, just as a matter of a quick introduction, I am the representative for District 34, and that's Taylorsville, a little bit of Mill Creek, a little bit of Murray, and a little bit of West Valley City. And my background in politics really comes from an advocacy perspective. I've been working within the Asian Pacific Islander communities and other communities as well, other ethnic communities, I should say, as well, for my entire career here in Utah. I've been here about 30 years. And it's just making sure that I can give a voice to communities who don't normally get heard here in Utah. And that's why I got into politics.
I think my commitment, because now you learn how, you learn as you're in more, because honestly, it's true. The first 2 years of anything, your job or anything, is really hard, and getting to know your colleagues. And we do pretty good in the Senate, get the colleagues getting together, but there's always new people. But I think, my commitment as I'm getting older too, you want to make something that's lasting and can change people's lives for the better. For me, it's been a lot at the forefront of the Asian American hate, and my, cultural things for others, for other groups, and just making sure that all people have a voice.
As a country, we're in a time of change, and in a time of elevating voices that have been yelling from the sidelines and from the backs of the backgrounds of meetings and conversations, and but they hadn't felt as though they had been heard. But it also feels like this is that time when minority voices are being elevated to show and to shine a light at the disparities that have been occurring within our communities. We see this within the Black Lives Matter organizations and the messages. And we see this with the Derek Chauvin charges, conviction, I should say. And we see this with what's happening with anti-Asian violence. Yesterday, I had a meeting with over 50 community members in the Asian American communities, a really diverse group of community members that the governor and lieutenant governor held it was a listening meeting. They wanted to hear from the communities. I've been here for 30 years. I have never seen something to this magnitude. I have seen our governors reach out to community leaders, but not in the inclusive way that our governor and lieutenant governor did yesterday.
I loved what you said about repeating history, because I've been talking about that a lot, because with Asian, all the stuff that's going on, like for my personal self, you know, I represent my district and my state, but I also represent my community of color.
Yeah.
And I'm Japanese American third generation. And we have examples here of pat racism, which is the Topaz, you know, American concentration camp. And I just went out to the new dinosaur in Moab, and I went with a filmmaker that flew in because she'd done stuff on the Moab Isolation Center, which was like a solitary confinement for Japanese and who had done nothing wrong. And were just standing up for their rights. And so the discrimination of, you know, the Issei Nisei, the first, second generation Japanese, that's always been something to me. But how we do that is, I think, you know, in Utah, just like other places, demographics are changing. And Asian American Pacific Islander are the fastest growing group in the nation and in Utah. And we have all kinds of Asian groups that aren't, you know, and other groups. And that's why I loved too that the, you know, the Department of Interior and, you know, the new Helen was here.
Yeah.
And she can represent the voices of her community. And I love that. So I think if we get more people involved and people, everybody has a story and everyone has a perspective that's guided by that story. And I think as more people like you get involved, and you say you're not that involved, but you are, because I can tell, and just doing this, doing what you're doing, because I'm so inspired by so many youth, because I worked with a lot of really active people that are working, they're doing school and everything, you know, and I wish I was younger and I could go back to those days.
That we need to continue to work for the good of our communities and not go back to, as you say, inaction or not be ignored again, so that our issues are the disparities within our communities, they're not ignored again.
Yeah.
Within the Asian American communities, this is a very big issue of being invisible. And it has taken such terrible tragedies for our communities to be seen. The fact that we are seen, and that we are being heard is so very encouraging. And so the conversation is the now what, right? How do we keep this momentum going? How do we continue to make sure that our voices are heard? Some of that is in policy, right? There are a couple of things that we're working on to address these systemic disparities. For example, it's really important in our community to have, and when I say our community, I mean the Asian American community, to have disaggregated data. Right now, when we look at Asian and Pacific Islander data, we often are looking at Asian and Pacific Islander data combined. And we know that within our communities, there's such diversity. Yeah. And so it hides, right? It allows for people to say things like, oh, Asian Americans don't have any issues.
Yeah.
Right. In the 1980s, Time magazine called Asian Americans the model minority.
Yeah.
And that stereotype had continued, right, even to today, so that we see ethnic groups being pitted one to another to the benefit of those that are in power.
Yeah.
Right. It keeps the status quo going. I'm encouraged by our governor and lieutenant governor saying that they hearing us and saying that they understand, hearing how important it is to get disaggregated data.
Not recently, like 3 years ago, because I've had, you know, I have my own children and experiences too, but so I wanted campus safety has been huge for me. So the last 3 years, that's been huge, and domestic violence and sexual assaults. It might have been the last bill or second to last bill to be passed, but it went through the ringer because it was a really, to me, a feel-good consensus bill that we had. It had and I worked with students and did a statewide student commission, the first of its kind. And I wanted it to be, we wanted it in statute because then it's more it's permanent. I wanted the students to have a really good voice, that it would be student-led and student-governed. And so we called it, the university's higher ed actually said, let's call it not just safety, let's call it the Student Safety and Equity Commission. And the word equity got really crazy up there. And it was viewed in very negative terms by many. And it wasn't controversial. It wasn't a nationwide effort to quell the conservative voice at all. Yeah. It was done because I felt that students have gone through so much. I mean, my kids and their friends, they've seen the deaths of, students that they know. Mm-hmm. They've seen tragedy galore. And this is a really good bill to kind of positive. I kept saying, this is positive for our students to, have a real seat at the table. Yeah. And, but I think we'll go ahead in that way because USU was committed to that.
Historic, finding yesterday. Mm-hmm. Only 7 times in the nation have police officers been charged. I'm sorry, not charged, have been convicted. Yeah. And I just heard that the Department of Justice will now investigate the Minneapolis Police Department. And this is not to say that our first responders are bad, right? I want to make sure that people know that I support our first responders. One of my signature issues is to make sure that our first responders have the funding for mental health resources.
Bill, place name amendments, and it was started with a tribal member from the Goshu tribe, and they wanted to get rid of the word squaw, which is universally offensive to any tribe here. And so I had to look at the process. So it was a geographical name process because you have to go through a naming committee here and federally. And I had even former Congress member Rob Bishop testify to that, the process. And it made sure that we have local input, but also that we have tribal voices in that area on making sure their input is there. And with all the anti-Asian sentiments around the country too, I think we need to get to know the communities. And Asian American Pacific Islander is so many different people.
And Utah's changing, right? The demographics are changing. Don't let people dismiss you as being young or being a woman or not understand.
Speak out. I always think it's important for us to speak out. I just saw with my own family and things that, after George Floyd, and it just brought out some things in people to really, they're not new, but these things are important to youth, and how you're treated. And, I worry with all the hate and things that are going on that it's just, you guys are experiencing in life so much. So you're going to be involved no matter what you do, because you're going through a pandemic. I mean, when does that happen? It's going to be something you'll talk about forever. And experiences with students that you see in universities. So like I said, I think you have to focus on school, but it's neat to do, get involved in. It could be your planning commission. It could be like groups that I like to see groups that you feel that you align with, to get involved with those groups, because they can help you too. They can say, hey, we're going to watch these bills, or we're going to go up and hike and clean something, or, get involved in, things like that. Or I know right now with the LGBTQ community and the students are really becoming a lot more vocal. But one thing is, you got to vote.
Yes.
You need to vote and support candidates that align with your beliefs. If you don't want to run, support them, and get into things like, we need it in every aspect of our life. We need judges that look like us, and we need, because then you trust the system more. So those are kind of some things I would think.